then we'll do like a, I don't know, like a fade transition here. God, I don't even know where to start. You know what? We'll do the typical Krys Polezoes opening. Okay, we'll roll it back. Pretend this is the start of the video. Hey, my name is Krys Polezoes, a gent and Argent metal music producer, and I had the absolute pleasure of partnering up with Impact Soundworks to check out their newest guitar library, Shreddage 3 Argent. For those of you who are longtime viewers, you probably know that I was already working with one of their libraries, that being Hydra. However, they gave me a review copy very kindly, so I threw together this little demo for them. Other than showcasing the guitar library's sound potential, I'm going to be doing a project walkthrough with this video, so you guys are going to get to see some of the fun little details that I always want to talk about but don't usually have time to record videos for. So with that being said, I guess we'll divide this into little chapters, and this chapter will be the actual library VST review section, whatever you want to call it. So, what do I think of Argent? Honestly, I wasn't 100% sold on it at first, but the more that I've gotten to play with it, I think the more I've sort of warmed up to and now prefer it over Hydra. I think that the DI has a really nice dark tone to it, and you know, I don't really tune as low as this thing can go, but being able to have a guitar that can play that low if you really want it without having to transpose it and mess up like the formants and all that stuff, it's nice, you know? The guitar doesn't sound warped or strange playing that low, which is definitely a step above Hydra, where the only way to play it lower was to just down tune it through Contact's natural sample transposition. That being said, I do know that there's a bunch of new features to this guitar library. I'm not intimately familiar with them because I don't really use them most of the time, so I'm not going to be talking too much about that. I'm mostly going to be talking about its applicability to writing heavy riffs for the purpose of creating Argent metal, and for that I think it excels. It has a lot of range. Like I said, it's able to tune super low, especially compared to Hydra. And I mean, honestly, even though I'm not using some of the presets in here, they're not bad. It comes with a good amount of brutal presets. Now, that being said, the one thing that I'm not a huge fan of, and this is something that I had problems with in Hydra as well, is that, God, where is it? It's in articulations now under these, but the release times by default are so open and high that it's hard to write very like tight riffs with lots of staccato in them without it creating a bunch of kind of like noisy tails. And in order to illustrate that, I'll kind of duplicate an instance here and I'll show you what I mean. So here are the riffs the way that I have them processed versus the default release times. So you can definitely see there's a lot more line noise, and the release times not being as tight creates some of these like scratchy artifacting sounds. And when you're really going for those tight riffs, that can be kind of annoying to deal with, especially if you don't know what's causing it. So that being said, what would I recommend? Well, personally, I use these values. On the pitched release, I use 20. And then on the power chord pitched release and the unpitched release, I also use 20. I just find that those values tighten up the riff playing a lot more, and it gets rid of some of that really annoying kind of like scratchy tail sound. But if you wanted a more naturalistic sound to it, you wanted it to sound more natural and real, I would definitely say you could probably keep these pushed up a bit. But if you don't care too much about that and you just want really tight riffs, I would definitely say lower those values down to 20 at least. Now, before we move on to the actual processing of the guitars, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys hear the DI just as it comes. So yeah, pretty dark, pretty smooth, pretty clean. I always do a little bit of preamp before I run it into Nolly and then all this other bullshit. So yeah, I guess we'll finally go over that. We're finally getting the Krys Polezoes rhythm guitar processing. Let's go, yay. Okay, and of course, before I start picking apart the sound, I'll actually let you guys listen to it really quickly. Alright, so longtime viewers are probably aware that I like to do a quad track dual tone blend, and for those who are like, whoa, those are some like, scary vague words, what do those mean? So quad track just refers to there being 4 guitar tracks, right? So we got guitar 1, 2, then 3, and 4 respectively down here. And then dual tone just refers to the fact that there's 2 guitar tones going on here. We got the one on the top and then the one on the bottom. The top one is where most of the main sound comes from, and like the high-end content, and then the bottom one is where more of that like thicker, like low-end girth to it lies. Having them separated like this gives me more control over both parts of the sound, and it also lets me keep the low end a little more tame without having to split hairs in an EQ or in the amp sim. Now, I went ahead and also provided a free alternative to what I'm about to get into, since I primarily use Archetype Nolly, and, I don't consider Nolly to be especially expensive, but I've been a bedroom producer before, for the longest time. I've been there wanting free alternatives and wanting a good sound and struggling, so I went ahead and provided a free alternative that we'll get into afterwards, but I'm going to get into Nolly first. In the preamp, I'm adding a bit of harmonic distortion, just a little bit, right? Just a little bit, to kind of thicken up the DI and add some extra harmonics. That's going into an OTT, and actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and turn off all this stuff and show you exactly what every element is adding to the overall sound. So then we have our harmonic distortion, which is being added through Ableton's built-in free saturator plugin. You can see it just thickens it a little bit in the low end. Then we're adding a multiband compressor on the OTT setting, dialing in some extra gain and flattening the signal just a little bit more. Now, the only problem that this adds is I felt like it added just a little bit too much high-end. You can really start to hear the background noise from the recordings a bit too much, so this EQ kind of like smooths that out. And then I have an instance of utility that's pulling only the left side stereo information from the signal, and then I'm hard panning that left. Now your default Ableton probably looks something like this, but if you right click this, you can change it to split stereo pan mode, which will let you truly pan things left and right. Something else worth noting is that, and this is something that I think is worth bringing up in general, but as much as I love Impact Soundworks, okay, you know, I've praised Hydra, and I'm kind of glazing Argent right now, because I do like them, don't get me wrong, but their multi-tracking kind of doesn't really work all that well. You have to finagle it a little bit, and what I mean is I can't just take this track and then like paste it underneath on Guitar 2, because even though it's on Guitar 2 and the multi-tracking, there's still enough sample bleed over that if they're playing like one-to-one the exact same time, it's going to create phase cancellation and turn your stereo sound into mono here and there. And I really hope that going forward, this is something they're able to tie down and like fix a bit more, because if I'm being frank, it's not the most annoying thing in the world, but it does suck having to do this every time. But a way you can kind of circumnavigate this is, one, obviously doing what I'm doing here, where utility is only pulling left side information, and then on the guitar that's panned to the right, it's pulling only right side information. That splits the signal a little bit and really helps with this. But if you come in here, if you zoom in really, really far, you can offset the MIDI just enough to where, like, if I play this, watch. Yeah, it's like blink and you miss it. But it does offset the signal enough between that and the utility that you can kind of get a much better stereo signal. And I don't usually encounter any phasing issues doing it this way. But I just thought that was worth mentioning before we move forward. Now we're going to get in what's going on inside of Nolly, and then all of my neurotic post-processing. Alright, so inside of Nolly, we have changed our input mode to stereo instead of mono, and that's because Nolly is kind of a CPU hog, and having it run separately on both channels, that takes up a lot of space. So I have both guitar signals down here inside of a group folder, and then the group folder has Nolly on top of it alongside all the other post-processing. So that kind of helps circumnavigate some of that extra CPU crunch you get from having like 4 instances of Nolly, reduced down to just 2. And setting it from mono to stereo lets you keep that stereo spread without any issues. So I have the gate adjusted to my MIDI, and then I don't think I'm doing anything on the output. Got a compressor and an overdrive 2 pedal, just really crunching that signal. And then up here we're running Nolly's 5150 into a Zilla cab. Oh yeah, and we're just running a dynamic 57 and a condenser 414 in these little positions, and I'll let you guys check out the settings I have dialed in on my amp. Now, keep in mind that, you know, if you're not using Argent and you just want the actual tone, you may need to adjust some of these based on your guitar, which I know that's a no-brainer, but I just, you know, feel the need to cover all my bases. So if you copy these settings and you're like, okay, well, this sounds like not what you're doing, it's fine. Just toy with it, mess with stuff, and shape your sound. And then we're running that into Nolly's modded EQ with some personal adjustments, and I don't think I have any post effects. No, I do not. Okay, well, yeah, that's it for tone 1, and honestly, tone 2 is even simpler, because tone 2 is just the Savage Rhythm preset right there, baby. Now, I'll go ahead and let you guys hear what that sounds like on its own without any of my post-processing. So we're running that first into a instance of OTT, where I've dialed up the decibel output because there's some gain reduction when you slap this bad boy on. I'm increasing the time really high. Normally, like, if the time is lower, the signal is more crunched, and if the time is higher, the signal is less crunch. You know, there's less upwards compression. These guitars are already pretty compressed, like, just from Nolly and all the distortion, so they don't really need even more. It almost sounds like it's overkill, which is also why I've dialed back the dry wet signal, the amount that's being affected, down to 40% instead of 100. So I'll let you hear what that sounds like with and without. That is then being sent into an instance of erosion, which I always use to add some extra fuzz to the signal. Now, this one is a little more subtle. This is literally just to add a bit in the high. Almost, it's almost so subtle you probably can't hear it. This one, however, is adding more high end for sure, and this one is probably a little crunchier. I like it. It's not required. It brightens it up and it mixes more high end content into the signal without turning it to complete static, so I like it. That's going into our first little EQ here. Now, before I get into my like psycho EQ work, know that I'm not a professional. I just mess with stuff as I'm listening through the mix, so for all I know, this could be completely wrong and I'm ruining my guitar sound, but you know, I like it, so that's what we got here. All right, we got a dip here at the 681, a bell at the 120, another bell at 220, and then we're shaving off just a little bit at the 1100. I think that I was having some high-end clash issues in the mix, so I just shelved that off a little bit. We get into another EQ with a bell drop at 370, and then a boost in like the 6K range. And then I'm shelving off everything under 200 with this one because that's going to be filled by the bottom tone. So we only really want the high-end content on this one. And that's being sent into a gate to tighten the playing even more. And then that's being sent into a group EQ where I have a dip at 239, another 200 hertz shelf just to really curve that off, and then a dynamic EQ that I appear to have not used, so it's not doing anything. Probably because there's shelving. Normally with this, I would add a like a threshold. I would make it a dynamic EQ and have it dip when the 200 signal on like chugs and stuff is getting out of control, but it kind of makes sense that there's nothing going on in here right now, since this is just high end and I'm not really going to have that like chugging issue. And then I'm finishing that off with an EQ that has some pretty severe, like bell notch boosts. You don't really have to do this. It makes it sound a little tubey. I like it personally. I know like it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I'll show you. So yeah, it's just a specific sound. And I will say that if you're playing anything in the higher register, definitely be careful with this EQ. I would almost say when you're playing really high notes, just automate it and turn off the boost. So that way it's only playing on the really low notes, because yeah, you can get some frequency clash in here, but I like it. So with that concluding the top tone, we can move on to the bottom one, which sounds like this. Now this one sounds very 30, very tubey. The preamp is the same. I already went over Nolly. It's doing its thing. I appear to have not used this instance of TDR Nova either, so I'm not really sure why that is there on either guitar track. That being said, just to reiterate, we're using the Savage rhythm preset for the slower tone, and then that's going into the same exact rhythm OTT, and then just this EQ8 that's dipping in the 700-800 range, and then boosting some of the high-end content. Another gate to keep the playing tight. Auto filter just to shove off some high-end, and then this right here is what's really making this sound strange. This is a EQ that I normally use for like throaty, super formant, like Skrillex style growls. I'll show you like what exactly this is doing to the guitar. So you can see it almost sounds like it has like a throaty vocal quality to it. And this is another like to taste thing. I like it. You know, you don't have to do it. If you want the settings, I'll click through the bell notches. There we go. 5 through 9, almost -6. And then just really tight bell curves at 125, 168, and then 235. But I like it. And in tandem, this is what these guitars sound like together. And then my final guitar group folder that has tone 1 and tone 2 in it has 2 instances of TDR Nova that hopefully aren't completely empty, and then a final EQ adjustment which has another small boost at 5K. There we go. Okay. So this one has a dynamic EQ that's compressing some of these lower chug signals at the 150 range, I think it is, probably in here. It's just an area you have to be careful of. And then also here in the 5K, I don't think that's exactly 5K. That's maybe like the 3K, 4K range, but yeah, or 4K to 5, but somewhere in there was some nasty frequency. But that sums that up pretty much. There's not much more to go over with those, so we'll go into the free version of these guitars. So that being said, I'm gonna show you what they sound like, and then we'll compare and contrast, okay? All of these guitars are basically the exact same setup as before. Same preamp settings, same EQ settings, except I think the growl EQ I dialed back. You can see on the scale it's been set to 60%, so those are not peaking as much. It just, you know, this EQ changes based on the sound of the guitar. On some guitar tones, you know, bigger sound might be needed, and on some other guitar tones you might need a little less. And in this instance, that was the case. But otherwise, all the settings are relatively the exact same. The only thing that's really changed is what amp they're going into, and we're using amped roots, free awesome amped roots. This lower one, just to get it out of the way really quickly, is just using the metalcore preset outright, and then the tone up here is just one that I slightly adjusted. I don't know why this isn't showing up, but I am using a custom IR here, and that's the Rip and Tear number 2 IR, which I don't even remember where I got this. I'll just like dump it on Mediafire or something for you guys to download if you want it, but that's where that's at. And yeah, I'll go ahead and just show you what these sound like as well really quickly. And then these are also running into another high-end boost because in the mix it just sounded too dark. So there you go. 2 pretty solid, in my opinion, tones. 1 free, 1 paid for. I obviously lean more towards Nolly because I just really like the sound, but in general, if you appreciate my approach to guitar tones and you know you like the kind of tubey, throaty sound that I go for, there's your there's your paid and your free version. So nice to have that off the chest. Everything else in this, we're probably going to zoom through really quickly. Next we have all the various effects and background sounds. These are all just a bunch of various samples or like VST presets that I found for background filler. You don't have to sound design too much here. There's a couple stuff that is custom made, but a lot of it was just kind of drag and drop. So like for example, we have this somatics like loop here. It's literally just like caked in reverb to make it like just something filler in the background. And we got the sweep. We got a riser. We have another riser. We have another riser. I know, very creative of me. We got this cool little thing. We got this bad boy. This one is an Omnisphere preset, though I don't remember which one it's called. It might be Buzzard, based on the sample that's being used, but I mean, it's in there. We got this little like blip that I made. I actually don't even remember what this used to be. Oh, well, yeah, that'll do it. We got this riser synth that I made. If I had to unfreeze it, we got a multi-band that's just taking out the low end. You can hear there's this really faint like rumbling, so this is getting rid of that. Same thing with the EQ. And it's shaving off some of the high end, so that's really safe for the cymbals. And then I'm reducing the stereo width to center it just a little bit in the mix, since there's already so much stuff in the full stereo. And then a really tiny reverb. And this synth is nothing more than like just two saw waves with a bit of detune, white noise, and that's going into the rectify distortion, and yeah, just some dimension expander. Oh my god. We got this. We got the full sample of this riser. We got this. We got this. And then we got another instance of the little riser synth, but this one's really drowned out in reverb. The sub is pretty self-explanatory. With Argent Metal, I tend to use a synthesized bass layered with a bass guitar VST, so this is just cracking, like just cracking on the cracking glass. I'm just boosting some of the human error and string noise to make it sound like it's being played in real time, and then just a bit of post-processing in a limiter, and I'm slathering that up with my own custom like thick sub preset that's just being hit with a lot of different types of harmonic distortion. I mean, what a throwback. Ooh, fat. That's being sent into the Argent Compressor, which isn't necessary. I think I'm probably using the OTT on steroids preset. And then I'm using an EQ to re-restrict that frequency range, and a utility to keep it in mono, and also automate the volume on it. And then the sub kick is just like one of these bad boys. And that's just this main kick spot. Some extra fuzz. And then the sub itself. You can make it like this. We got LFO1 attached to all this fun stuff. Just the compressor. We got all these matrix bits. You know, macro 1. Set to the wavetable position. That's being sent into Camel Crusher, then erosion, then a multiband compressor to separate the highs from the lows. First EQ, second EQ, and an auto pan. This is just extra grit for ear candy. It's also not too complicated to make. And then likewise with the actual sub kick, it's just a sub kick with a with a pitch envelope on it. A little bit of compression. And that's being sent to Camel Crusher and all this other fun stuff. This mid-side EQ is to separate the mono and stereo signals. So in stereo, I'm removing all of the low-end content so that I can keep the actual like body wide while not pushing the sub into the full stereo range. See, it just rumbles around the head, doesn't feel as focused. Now we get into some of the juicy synth design up here. Now, I'm going to be completely forthcoming with some of this stuff. Don't really be afraid to use like preset synths for this stuff, because a lot of the post-processing for these sounds comes in the form of like what you do after, right? So like that's what the preset I'm using sounds like. You know, just right there, Blood Rave 5. It's just a really simple like saw pluck with a bit of this stuff, but really you don't even need this. You know, like I could duplicate this and just you know, ooh, add some of that. And like that's a really basic sound, and yeah, it still sounds pretty good. So never be afraid to use like presets for this stuff, okay? Especially because you can really like just swap through, like you can design the sound in post, right? Like this. And you could even come in here and change what amp we're using. So like you can get so many different sounds from just changing like really basic parts of your processing and just running it back, you know, through different presets. So like I'm telling you, don't be afraid to just run through some really basic synth presets and see how your process like mangles the sound. The whole point of sound design is to just throw shit at the wall and see what works. And there's nothing wrong with running to presets to see what your own like sound design and audio racks does to the noise. Now, that being said, I'm going to run you through the kind of setup I have on this sound to show you what all it's doing and how you can create a funky little noise like this. So for the most part, every part of this process is applying kind of the same basic principles that Mick goes through at his, I think it's is it GDD? No, GDC, speech, where he talks about how he's essentially routing one MIDI of sine and noise into various audio effect racks, and then sort of like picking and choosing the parts he likes the most out of those, and then like splicing it together after. I'm just kind of taking that same concept of applying like various forms of compression, distortion, and then whatever like other audio effects I think are fun or sound neat at the time. But instead of running that on the same piece of MIDI, I'm just doing it separately because I like having, I'm neurotic, okay? Yeah, I like having all the fine-tuned control over it. So the first thing we're doing to this MIDI is we're sending it into an instance of Camel Crusher on the American High Gain preset. That's being sent into Ableton's default amp plugin on the Boost and Crunch preset set to clean. We're running that into the Argent Compressor, and I'm almost 100% sure it's on OTT with steroids. Just really over compresses the signal, but if you didn't want to shell out money on Argent Compressor, you can kind of get the same sound by just adding two OTTs and playing with the settings a little bit. Don't tell anyone I said that. We got an EQ to deal with the frequencies a bit. Then we got a diopter adding some squish to the sound. That is then being sent to an auto filter, which I'm using like an LFO. That is then being sent into another instance of OTT. And then for the sake of the transition here at the start, I'm adding it to another auto filter. And then to dial the sound back in the mix, I'm using a utility to run it in complete mono. And the process for the rest of these kind of like gritty bass synths is relatively the same. You can see it's another preset, run into Camel Crusher, an amp, Argent Compressor, OTT, another EQ. I basically just duplicated this sound, tried out some different presets on Camel Crusher. I changed this from clean to lead, changed the Xfer Serum preset. So like I said earlier, just adjusting small things and getting a completely different sound out of it. And would you look at that, it's that time again. We've duplicated this track. You can tell because this one's using dark wave and this one is also using dark wave. But compared to before, this one sounds like this. And I think actually this is literally the exact same sound, but it's just being played at a low octave at continuous sustain notes. And we got this fun drone that I made a while ago. I'm just reusing it for this project. If you think it sounds cool, I'll just run through the routing and shit really quickly. And if you want to see it, you can pause the video, run through all this. Yep. And that's being sent to utility, Argent Compressor, to EQs, and then Valhalla's Supermassive on the massive vocal preset, which I am to die for. Then we got this bass in the center. And we have this pluck that accents all of that. And then we got this fun little LFO guy. Now, these last two I figured people would want to look into. I'm also going to try and be quick about these because explaining every little detail is starting to wear me down a little bit. So, starting with the LFO bass, we have a really basic pluck going on. This is also a synth that I started with in here, which I think by default is just a pluck. I don't want to ruin the LFO work that I put on it, but yeah, I just came in and I mangled it a little bit. There's this LFO that isn't on trigger and envelope, so that means it always plays continuously normally. That's what's causing that. I could bypass it, show you. Here's the effects, you know, here's the matrix with all the bullshit on it. There's your default saw wavetables, and the filter cutoff is there. That's being sent into, you guessed it, a boost and crunch. That's going into a head crusher. That's going into a diopter. And then just two EQs. And an extra filter just to be sure. So it seems like okay, no, I did use it. I used it later over here. Okay. This accent sound is literally just your kind of like typical like detuned saw wave pluck. I'm not really gonna explain that one too much. I just lowered some of the high end. That was it. And now we get into the nasty center bass, which thankfully the post-processing on isn't too crazy. Just shoving some high end, low end, and then OTT. So this nasty bass. We got a lot to go through. This one's kind of a monster. So we, I don't think we're not using any of the LFOs. We got envelope 1, envelope 2, and envelope 3. I don't remember if those are affecting anything in here. Probably. Doesn't look like it, no. So yeah, there's all the effects. Here's what all of this is affecting. Here's all the filter and effects macros there, and then same thing here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Global matrix. Booyah. That's our sound. So you're probably wondering, okay, that's cool, what does all this do? Okay, well, the bass center and the accent are meant to be combined with the sub and the guitars, so it creates this really big, awesome, fucking cool sound. And that wraps up the bass synths. Now, moving on, I'm also going to try and be pretty quick about these because they're not super crazy. This is just a 3-synth layer. We have our Doom Eternal lead up here. Which I already did a tutorial video on how to create, so you can check that out. This is, I think, literally just like a square wave or a saw wave that's been like just caked in reverb. So we have this. What this does is this creates a different tonality for the reverb that's playing under the synth lead. So we have our synth that's pretty dry. We have our reverb tail. And then we have this tremolo like guitar lead. So we got this. We got this. And we got this. And then last but not least, we got drum shit. I don't know. The same thing with the drums as the guitars. A lot of this is personal preference and just using my ears. I don't actually know what I'm doing, but I'll still show you in case you're curious. So we got this impact, you know, whoosh, ooh-yah. We got this kick right here. This just accents the initial impact of the start of a new segment. So, it just makes this very opening hit after the build-up. It just makes it hit harder. See, like it's a subtle difference, but it does have just that much more impact right at the start. This specific sidechain, my big hit, is also helping with that. Whenever this plays, anything that's being affected by my sidechain group, big hit causes there to be a big release window, or at least the biggest of the three. And that big release window kind of ducks everything that isn't like the drums. And even then, it's really just the kick and the snare. So it's like even the cymbals get ducked pretty hard by this like opening, like slam. And it yeah, it just helps it like cut through, really big impact. And then the drum work really isn't that complicated. We just got our basic kick and snare, some crashes and hi-hats. I'm running this stuff on the kick, just really not too much shaping. This big long reverb tail is only really for this opening spot where the snare is like huge. And then also I'm using a bit of that here during the transitions. Now it sounds jarring on its own, but when you have like the build up with the risers and everything and then this hits, it adds just a little bit of extra character and noise to the transition. And then the cymbals are like, I guess this. They're getting squashed kind of hard. My general thing with cymbals is just squashing them and then making them almost exclusively super high-end content, like background filler. You can see I'm doing that pretty harshly here with this EQ. Like I'm really just removing this section where the guitars normally play as well and just leaving it to kind kind of just be a high-end content filler. The actual kit that I'm using is a Get Good Drums Invasion. I think I started using low-tuned Brute on this one, and then I just started messing with stuff and changing it, so I'll just show you those settings really quickly per cycle, and you can pause to check them out if you so desire. And then the last thing I have in here is this juicy little kick sound. Probably heard that a lot in the Doom soundtrack. It's just me running this diopter preset I have specifically for making those juicy kick sounds. You can do this with really any kick. And the main purpose of this is to accent that mic kick that I had earlier. So we got like a... I also have this glue compressor. Yeah, this is just a parallel compression. I kind of forgot this is down here because I don't tend to do it this way, but yeah, we're just different amounts of parallel compression on the different parts of the drum kit. Seems like it's mostly just GGD that's being affected by it. And of course, I couldn't not mention the vocal track, which, you know, is just recording some vocals that I got from, we'll say, a friend. And yeah, I mean, they're about what you'd expect. The last thing I'll mention with this project is how it's routed. So I have this thing of chains in my pre-master and then my master, right? To spread out the limiting in this track and to kind of get a cleaner amount of compression, I'm spreading out the limiting across some various chains. Again, if you're familiar with some of my other project walkthroughs, I've talked about this before. But essentially, you know, first we have the drums. I want the drums to be clean and sit on top of everything. So in terms of hierarchy, they go straight to the pre-master, which sits on top of everything else, right? Pre-master, straight to master. So drums go there, vocals as well, go straight there. I don't actually think the guitars do now. So drums and vocals go right to the pre-master, straight to the master. The effects, guitars, bass synths, harmonic, those all go to the basic chain. All of the sub content, sub bass, all that goes into the hype chain, and then those both go to the chain group, and the chain group goes to the pre-master, and as we said before, pre-master goes to master. Now, if you've never done routing like this in Ableton, really easy. All you have to do is just like right click over here and create an audio track, and in order to be able to see all this extra stuff, you need to click this little circle right here. Pops all those out, and yeah, once you have these set up, and like I said, these literally just have like limiters on them. Once you've created a folder for your stuff, you know, like the guitar folder, for example, you'll need it folded out to see this sometimes, but up at the top, you just set that from exit out to basic, which is the basic chain. And then over here on the basic chain, you set the input from auto or off to in, and you set that to go to the chain group. Same thing with hype. You set it to go to the chain group, you set the chain group to go to the pre-master, and then you set the pre-master to go into the master. Hopefully that doesn't sound too complicated. And then down here, this is just the master channel. I probably could have done some of this stuff on the pre-master, but like for example the auto filter that I have, I think it's like normal for most of the track. It's only here for the ending transition. Same thing with this this reverb. It just low passes the signal more and then washes it out with more reverb as it fades out. And of course my volume fader is also working in tandem with it down there. Volume fader, reverb, frequency. So yeah, that's it for those bits, and then the actual mastering part. Okay, where do we start? Volume fader. Okay, volume fader is what I use for a bit of dynamicism. I usually drop the quieter parts down. Anything that I consider a transitionary element, so like a verse or like this opening bit, for example. I really want the main riffs to hit hard and be like the loudest part, so I drop this down by at least 2 decibels, and then when it transitions into the riff, it's hitting at the full 0. You got TDR Nova. It's just there to like brick wall anything under 20, because we really don't need all that extra rumble, potentially creating mix mud going into the final master compressors and doing nasty, awful things we don't want. Then we have a multi-band compressor. I think this is literally just one of the default presets called multi-band compression that I've lowered the percent on. I'll show you what that does. Just glues it together a little bit more. This is normally where I do final EQ changes. I don't usually have to do a whole lot here. It's only if I get too lazy to go back, and if I'm like, oh, the kick needs a little bit more bass, I might just increase like a decibel or 2 on the low end and not go deal with the kick directly because I'm lazy as fuck. But yeah, this is usually where I do that kind of smaller adjustment, final touch stuff. And we got the basic glue compressor into saturator, into glue compressor, dual tape saturator, like setup mimicry. This is turned off because I use this during the mixing stage. This lowers the decibel gain by 12 and then cuts off all the low end content, so you can only hear the high end. And this lets you sort of, I think, at least for me, it lets me hear how everything is colliding and mixing well together. I think the low end can kind of mask that a little bit, so for me, I like to use this just to hear what it sounds like, right? So and then I also use that with FabFilter to gauge if my transients are hitting in the right spot. So if I were to turn this off, you can see it's just like this big brick wall sausage fest. But if I turn this off, or turn it on rather, duh, you can see the drum transients are up here and they're hitting in that like range that I want. Like if I were to turn off the drums, this is kind of like the range I'm looking for. I want that 3 decibels above everything else, or at least close to it. And then we just have a basic FabFilter and SPAN for frequency range assessment. Oh god. Oh yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I don't think there's really much more for me to go through on this project. You might find this to be of interest. Let me just bump those up to 162 really quickly. Yeah, here's some fun stuff. Yeah, with that. I don't really know how to end videos typically. I will say absolutely, like, big thanks to Lauren over at Impact Soundworks. She basically took care of this whole thing and hooked me up with this review copy of Argent, and you know, without her, this video probably wouldn't be out, and I wouldn't be releasing this track. Which also, speaking of, you know, by the time this video goes out, this track should be up on, or at least in the process of being up on, like, Spotify and the usual bullshit. So you know, if you want to support the channel, just run my music up on Spotify or wherever you like to listen to it, and you know, that's enough. Over time, that gives me enough money to keep making music and pumping out more videos. So that being said, I'll see you guys in another 2 years when I finally release another video. Take care. Duh. Whoa, music stuff. Krys Polezoes music. Oh my god, Krys Polezoes music, Argent Metal.